Hey, how's it going? It's John Suntress, and welcome to Word Balloon. You found us. That's excellent. If this is your first time, please consider subscribing to us via iTunes or Stitcher or certainly Last.fm and all the various places you can find podcasts. Word Balloon is invariably there. Subscribe. Please let me know what you think of the show. Write ratings over at Apple's podcast platform and give me a review. You can say nice things, you can say lousy things. You suck, John, and let me tell you why. Happy to hear your feedback either way. But do me a favor and like me where you can and leave comments. And also, as always, email me, john@wordballoon.com. I'm interested in your feedback. I'm interested in what you're thinking about the content I put here. Also, I have a YouTube channel under Word Balloon. Would you please consider subscribing there? I've got about 400 plus subscribers currently. I'd like to get to at least 1,000 and start generating more video content. So go to YouTube and click on the Word Balloon channel and please subscribe.
Terrificon, Connecticut's biggest Comic-Con, returns to Mohegan Sun, August 9th to the 11th. Meet Billy D. Williams, Val Kilmer, Doctor Who's John Barrowman, and the voices from Animaniacs and Thundercats. New England's largest guest list of comic book artists from DC and Marvel Comics is at Terrificon on August 9th to the 11th at Mohegan Sun. Tickets on sale now at Terrificon.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the weekend and welcome to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Interesting show for you today. We're going to look back at Watchmen. It's been 10 years since the movie. Of course, the comic book came out in 1986, and HBO is going to be mounting its Watchmen series later this year. I know that's one of the big things that they're talking about at Comic-Con, so I thought this was a good time to look back at the Watchmen movie, now 10 years old. I was at the Watchmen press junket back in 2009, the spring of 2009. It was in San Francisco at WonderCon, and got to meet the cast. Zack Snyder, Dave Gibbons was there, sat in some press junkets, and got some decent information despite the limited time we get at these press junkets. I gotta be honest, I'm not a big press junket fan. Yes, it puts you face-to-face with the stars of the film, and it does give you a brief opportunity to ask some questions of the directors and the writers and everybody involved that they put out there in these press junkets. But as you know, I like long-form interviews, and there just isn't time. You'll be hearing conversations with Jackie Earle Haley and Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Patrick Wilson and Billy Crudup and Malin Akerman, and as far as the cast goes, and also Zack Snyder and Dave Gibbons, as I mentioned earlier. But they're brief. I tried my best to ask some important questions. We were given an expanded look at Watchmen. It wasn't just the trailer. We saw the first 10 minutes of the movie uncut, and then saw several scenes that were peppered throughout the film. And so I had a limited knowledge of the film going into these interviews, and that's another reason why I'd like to look back now 10 years later and see how everything turned out. I gotta be honest, I like the Watchmen movie. I don't love it, and I do think there are flaws to it, but I do think deep down, I have to hand it to Zack Snyder, I think he realized the dystopian vision that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons brought us in the original comic book. I think the characterizations were absolutely solid and represented what we got in the comic books as well. The actors did a tremendous job for the material they were given, and I think Zack Snyder's visual choices were good. I gotta be honest. Again, I like this movie. What he did later in the DC Universe, well, that's up to debate, and you've heard my opinion. I think they've been more misses than hits. But I do think, Watchmen did decent. Certainly compared to today's comic book numbers, it's not as great as was the case back in the day. Or I should say, comparing back in the day to the current situation. Domestically, Watchmen made $107,453,620. It was in the theaters for about 12 weeks. It debuted March 6, 2009, and went to disc. And it's so funny they even mentioned streaming, but it was sold on iTunes as a digital product as well. Back in July of 2009, the director's cut did come out later. All of this stuff is real, and it did happen that way. But it is interesting, again, I think, to look back And some of the comments that are made in these conversations resonate in today's filmmaking world when it comes to the superhero genre. So I think you're going to enjoy this look back at Watchmen with the cast and crew on today's Word Balloon. It's all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your great support through Patreon. If you like Word Balloon and you like what I do here, do me a favor. If you think it's worth your while, is Word Balloon worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month to you? I hope so. If you think so, then maybe you'll subscribe to Word Balloon by going to patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you very much for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. This episode of Word Balloon also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. Aftershock's having a great year, man. I mean, they're putting out some terrific titles to go along with their established hits. You know, things like Animosity from Marguerite Bennett and all of Garth Ennis's Aftershock output, including Jimmy's Bastards and A Walk Through Hell. Cullen Bunn, I think, found a very comfortable home at Aftershock in things like Dark Ark and his new book very soon, Knights Temporal. Also, my buddy Tim Seeley doing really great stuff with Dark Red, a very fun, interesting Midwest comic book about a middle-class vampire living in the Midwest. Pretty funny stuff. There's also other great books like Chris Sabella's Trustfall. I'm looking forward to Matthew Klickstein's You Are Obsolete. Joe Pruitt is repackaging some of his great horror stuff from the old years and also adding new stuff to his horror anthology Shock. Just a few of the books that Aftershock has coming in the days and weeks ahead. Now, we'll be talking to more Aftershock creators, certainly after Comic-Con as well, about some of their projects, but you don't have to wait. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. All right, without further ado, let's get into our Watchmen conversations. These were roundtables again held at WonderCon. You can hear some background chatter because as I was at one table with a couple people, in this case, when we get started, it'll be Zack Snyder and Dave Gibbons. Other roundtables are going on with members of the cast as well. So, and then we'll have some straight-up one-on-ones that are brief. But again, when I know I've only got a couple minutes, I try to get to the point and get the best answers I can in the limited time given to us. So, to start things off, let's listen to this roundtable with Zack Snyder and Dave Gibbons talking about the Watchmen movie back in 2009 on Word Balloon.
You mentioned that the director's cut will be released theatrically in July.
That's the hope, anyway.
Where?
They're saying right now New York and L.A.
Will there be a pause in it, like Che? Like a restroom break?
Like a, yeah, right. Intermission?
Yeah.
It's only 3 hours, though.
Train your bladder, that's the thing.
Like Titanic, right? Titanic.
Yeah. And well, it was strange because the rough cut that Zack showed me last August, I spoke to Zack in the men's room before the movie, and then we found ourselves in the men's room immediately after.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's synchronised, It's, but I'm wise to it now. Don't drink a pint of coffee before you go and see Watchmen. And in addition to Hollis's death, which is I think you said it was about 10 minutes of stuff to cut Hollis down.
The Hollis was 10 minutes, and then I think the other stuff is like, there's more Forbes. There's a big sequence on Mars between Dan and Laurie and Manhattan. The whole thing about like you're sleeping with him. That whole like I'm a puppet that can see the strings. That whole thing.
Okay. And then the nudity. How much nudity?
Well, it's just like that shot when they come. They're walking up the stairs, coming to the top of the glass palace. It's pretty effective.
String home.
Yeah. It's like a bell clacker.
And then as far as the violence that you had to cut out.
There's a little more Rorschach, like a couple more hacks into the head of the child killer. Actually, a piece comes off, and it's pretty hardcore. And then there's because Dan sees that Hollis is dead on the TV, and he beats up that top knot in the bar. And he really knocks his teeth out. He really beats the crap out of him in a horrible way.
And the thing I really like about the scene is the way Rorschach taps him and shows his Dan, come on, not in front of the civilians.
Not in front of the civilians, which is like a great line.
Wow.
And it's awesome because the implication, I think, we always talked about it, like some people think don't be violent. It's not don't be violent in front of the civilians, it's don't be emotional in front of the civilians.
Don't lose your temper.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because he's all like,
That really cuts off.
Yeah, it's good to see that.
What did you think of him hacking the child molester? Because that's not what happened in the graphic novel, obviously. It made me wince. It was, I think that was about as violent as it gets. But, I mean, interestingly enough, it kind of fits with the symmetry thing. It shot me somebody down the middle of their head. I could see it had a real resonance like that. And I think it had to be something that had a real kick to it, because it is what backs into Rorschach, so it's got to have a huge challenge, and it has.
What was your big oh shit moment, Dave, seeing what Zack did? Said, I can't believe they filmed it.
My big oh shit moment started at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the movie. No, I was just blown. But it's really funny. The first time I watched it, because I'm obviously so close to this, I watched it in a kind of technical, analytical way. But the second time I watched it, I just went anonymously to a press screen. Okay. And I was taking I had really bad jet lag when I went in, and I thought, I'm going to fall asleep. That would be terrible. Please don't take a picture. But I was completely carried away from it. I think I have to say that opening montage, I just think it's absolutely is genius. There's so much in there. It's so much sets the tone. It involves the audience completely. I think that was my real wow.
Someone asked me. Someone's trying to dork me out. They're like, "Oh, so you didn't go for the snow globe?" And I was like, "The snow globe's on the top of the TV. It's not like, and we had it made. It's custom made snow globe. That's how freaking hardcore."
I noticed this time stuff is actually floating.
Yeah, I shook it up right before. Yeah. It's pretty funny. For both of you, it seems like the movie's really resonating with the mainstream audience. It seems like Watchmen fever is really, hitting the mainstream. How does that feel? And for you, creating this, and for you, as bringing this film to life?
Well, just to go first, it's weird for me because, I live in a sleepy little village in England, and I kind of abstractly know this is all happening, and I speak to the guys, and I see it on the internet. But when I went to New York a couple of weeks ago, I'm in the car coming from the airport, and the driver's talking, what are you doing? I said, well, we're publicising this movie, and I'm a comic book artist, and that, and I'm going to do some signatures and panel drawings, so I'm going to do some drawings. He said, oh, will you do me a drawings? I said, okay, so I drew like this quick little crappy Rorschach I do, and I handed it back to him. And we stopped at an intersection. I think maybe he was expecting like Superman or Batman, and it's this guy in a hat with like a block for a face. And he said, "Oh, right." I said, "When you see the movie, you'll get it." So he said, "Right." And he put the clipboard down on the seat, and we both looked up at once as a New York bus went by. And a Porsche Rorschach. I get it. And to be here as well, there's huge billboards everywhere. It's the same in London. There's people sending me photographs of people reading Watchmen on the tube, the Underground Railway in London. Yeah, it's real. It's everywhere.
Yeah, that's got to be gratifying to see so many people excited about the film and turn to the book, and the book sales going through the roof as they have in the last year since the teaser and the Owl Ship last year in San Diego.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's I've said that. I go, look, if I made a 2-hour ad for the book, I did my job, because I think that there was no way I was going to make a movie that replaced the book. That wasn't like that really. First of all, there's no way to do that. Secondly, I don't want to do that. If the experience can be supplemental to the reading of the graphic novel, then that's the best thing that I can hope for. And I feel like it is. I feel like you get in the end, you're still going like, wow, I wonder what, geez, I got to find out about that. And it's all there. And by the way, we all know graphic novel is like, you could pore over it for quite a while to find all the answers you need to find.
Yeah, I think people come out of the movie talking about the movie. That's what I've seen, and they can turn to the reference book if they really want to get deeply into it. Yeah, that's what I feel. I think the graphic novel is valid and complete in its own right, and I think the movie is valid and complete. It's not that one is an evolution of the other. They're two separate things, two different ways.
I mean, it's funny because Lloyd and I were just talking about how I think the real thing that's cool about the movie, the big thing in the movie that I watch is that the movie the way it is has it has no business being like that, R-rated, 2.5 hours long. Cocky Dr. Manhattan and love scene in the Owl Ship, all the way. All those things which really, we were just saying, it's those things that I'm proposing, expecting them to say no. But then it's just weird because we got a lot of what I want.
I was thinking if I can just come back again, like when we did the original graphic novel, Alan and John and I were left alone to do it, and we kind of did it. And it's great that Zack has found himself in a position where he's been able to make his movie largely without a lot of editorial micromanagement. I think that's the great benefit.
Okay, man, looking back, let's take a look at how both of their careers have gone since Watchmen. Dave Gibbons, God bless him, man. I'm such a fan, and truly, as you know from our word building conversations and other places where Dave has ever granted interviews, literally one of the nicest people in comics. I mean, so gracious with his time, so gracious with his point of view. I mean, a real vet that has been living the comic book life for well over 30 years and really has a great, I think, grasp of where the industry is and where it's going. I mean, he's bulletproof. No matter what the Watchmen movie was going to do, and certainly in comic book circles, Dave is regarded as the master that he truly is. And since the time of the Watchmen movie, he's made, little entrees into digital comics with the company Made Fire and experimented with digital comics. He also even did it with the Watchmen motion comic with himself and John Higgins. With the Made Fire company and in comics themselves, hey, the guy runs around, ends up being the co-creator of Kingsman, the Secret Service, with Mark Miller. And I'm so glad that Mark tapped Dave for that and said, hey, what are these Millerverse, comics are you interested in? And Dave chose Secret Service. And, the movie's different from the comic, but there's definitely a connection there. And again, I think you got to hand it to Dave and Mark for what they were able to create with Kingsman and Secret Service. So Dave's doing great. I hope to be talking to Dave in a little bit after post-San Diego. I want to give Dave a chance to regroup. I mean, my God, the guy comes from England, goes all the way to the West Coast, and, is always a main fixture at Comic-Con. I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about the Watchmen HBO production. Will he be more of a advocate than he was than DC's before Watchmen? It'll be very interesting to see. As for Zack Snyder, his movie record speaks for itself. You don't need me to rehash it with you. I think more mediocre responses than out-and-out hits. I do give him credit for Man of Steel. It's interesting. I mean, I didn't like a lot of his choices in Man of Steel, but I have to confess that I do find myself going back and rewatching it, and I think maybe like it a little bit more than my initial feelings on the movie. All that said, everything that Zack Snyder created for the DC Universe is now out the window. Justice League, the last gasp of any Zack Snyder-influenced DC Universe as far as the movies go. Television is its own animal, continues to be so, and rightfully so. They are succeeding where I think the movie end has failed. We'll see what the future holds, but certainly a new Batman movie and a new Superman movie will have nothing to do with the influence that Zack Snyder was able to imprint with Man of Steel, Superman, Batman, and certainly his attempt at Justice League. All that said, let's move on with the further examination of the Watchmen movie, and now a roundtable with the two anti-heroes of Watchmen, Jeffrey Dean Morgan playing the comedian, and Jackie Earle Haley playing Rorschach. I got to tell you, once again, top to bottom, I think the cast did an excellent job with the material they were given. And it's interesting to hear Jeffrey Dean Morgan talk about the comedian in this roundtable, because he, in particular, was coming off of a lot of good guy roles in film and television. His big breakout role was as George on Grey's Anatomy. And man, I'm telling you, if you're a Grey's fan or your significant other was a Grey's fan, my sister, massive Grey's Anatomy fan, she loved George. And it is so funny because this is years before Jeffrey's turn as Negan in Walking Dead. But now, of course, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, you think of him as a bad guy, but he used to be like one of the sweetest, a George Clooney-esque sort of, wonderful guy that I think every girl would have loved to have dated back in the Grey's Anatomy days. So instead, he gets the opportunity to play one of the darkest characters in Watchmen. I don't know if the comedian is the darkest. Rorschach's pretty dark. Hell, Ozymandias is pretty dark as well, as we know. So it's fun to, again, contextually listen to Jeffrey Morgan's 2009 words, comparing them where he went. And the same goes for Jackie Earle Haley as well, and we'll get more into that with my one-on-one with Jackie a little bit later in the show. But for now, check out this conversation with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Jackie Earle Haley, and a roundtable of the press. You'll hear me ask a few questions, just like you did in the last one, on this portion of Word Balloon. Next up, the two bad boys of the Watchmen cast, comedian and Rorschach. Comedian played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who speaks first, and Jackie Earle Haley.
Hey, guys.
Hey, guys, how are you? That's Cash. Hey, how are you, man? Hey, guys.
You guys are like the two real, characters that are assholes, yes, but the ones that are so sure of your characters and your motivations in terms of just who you are. I mean, you're the moral barometers.
Yeah, not very good moral barometers, but moral barometers all the same.
But certain in your actions and your motivations. You are the heroes of your stories in this.
Yeah, that's how we, you kind of have to approach it that way. But I think certainly, what Alan Moore was saying within these two characters, though they are kind of the dark side, I think they're very clear in their actions and who they are, certainly. There's not a lot of, although, I'll let Jackie answer that. The comedian lives very much in this realm of grayness and kind of loves that aspect of it, whereas, Jackie's take on Rorschach is much different than that. But, all the credit in the world to Dave and Alan for kind of making these characters so complex and with so many layers and getting to kind of, live and immerse ourselves in the world of Watchmen and play these characters was certainly fun. And you're right, we there was an end to the beginning and an end, and the roller coaster ride in between. But I always kind of knew where I was going within that.
I think, what's cool about these two guys is I think they kind of take that same, the stimulus of this world, the complexities, the grays, and they kind of deal with it in a very opposite manner. And yet they kind of admire, I think, each other because of that moral compass in a sense,
Jeffrey, you're a guy that typically plays a lot of kind, nice types of characters. Yeah. Is it a good opportunity for you to sort of break out of that and play like just this real asshole of a guy?
Yeah, absolutely. I coming off of Grey's Anatomy or P.S. I Love You, a couple of romantic comedies that have been really easy to kind of stay in that world. And yet, as an actor, I desperately wanted to do something different. And the fact that Zack was able to look at me and go, "You're my comedian," I give him all the credit in the world because, frankly, when I heard he wanted to meet with me, I was like, "There's no way in hell he's going to give me this job as being, the biggest asshole in the world, basically." And for him to kind of have the trust in me, because it was exactly what I wanted to do, and I'm really glad I did it. We'll see how the fans react to the nice guy being not so nice anymore, but I loved it. It was a great challenge.
Well, are you guys aware that the early buzz about the cast is that you two are the standouts in the movie, that your characters and the way you bring them to life sort of really resonate with the audience out there?
That's really fucking sweet. I've heard people say nice things about us, and of course, in the last 3 weeks, we've been doing nothing but talking about this. So, it's really great that people are responding to these characters. Although it makes me wonder about the people that are responding to these characters.
America loves assholes.
I guess so.
Yeah, they love these dark characters.
Yeah.
The violence and sort of unambiguous nature of their.
Yeah, look, we realized, I think, early on what a thrill it was to be these two characters. So I'm really, speaking for myself, I feel really lucky that people are responding. But I think everybody's great in the movie. That being said, I think everybody's performance.
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of, responds, to every character in like a different kind of way. And I think, in talking about Rorschach, there is just something kind of impossible about him that I think people admire. And it's because we live in this very complex world. and I think we would all we don't necessarily agree with his morality, but it is just having that very decisive moral compass, his absolutism, and that sense of. I think we all in this complex world try to make things black and white, and that's what's impossible, but Rorschach doesn't. And so it's not, it's fucked up, but it's weirdly admirable.
In a lot of, I was just going to say, in a lot of ways, Night Owl and Rorschach kind of represent two different aspects of a Batman sort of character. And certainly Night Owl's the cleaner, happier guy, and you're more the vigilante and more the underground guy. And I'm wondering if that thought of Batman, informed any way you looked at Rorschach.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, not really in the sense that I looked into Batman, but in the sense of definitely remember somewhere along the line hearing an Alan Moore thing on the net somewhere where he was talking about that part of the meditation or the process was to see what would it be like if studying a character like a Batman, talking about Rorschach, and who would really do that, to go out and dress up in an outfit and go be a costume vigilante, and his answer was he'd be a nutbag, and that's so that was very informing, and it's so obvious on the page too. I mean, but I've always kind of felt that because everybody always feels that Dan is, and he certainly is.
Sure. Were you guys fans, obviously aware of the graphic novel before taking the roles, and if so, how daunting was it to take on these iconic parts?
Well, no. I never, until someone called me and said, look, Zack Snyder, the guy did 300, is doing this film. Warner Brothers sent me a Xerox copy of the graphic novel, which is just a bad way to look at Watchmen in black and white Xerox. But that was my introduction to it, and obviously since I've become a huge fanboy, and we knew immediately, I think, what the fans' perception of this novel was, and the scrutiny we were under as actors and filmmakers, filming this thing. All you do is go on the internet for half a second and realize that everybody pretty much hated us and thought we were the wrong choices and that Zack was the wrong director. And so I never opened my computer again in Vancouver while I was there. Go.
I wasn't a comic fan at all. Hadn't heard of it. Saw some images. I'd actually seen Rorschach. But wasn't aware of. We can't even remember where I saw it. Friends, comic book friends and stuff. But as a kid, I never read comic books. I didn't understand the pacing of it. You know what I mean? Do you look at the pictures? Do you read the words? And I also thought it was like a kid's medium. So in reading it, I immediately was enthralled at what an awesome piece of literature, and the layers, and you can read that thing 20 times. As a matter, I don't think there's any end to how many times you can read it and go, okay, I've got it all. You know what I mean? So you can read this thing at age 75, and for your 400th read, you're going to go, oh, I never saw that. So I've since, been reading comic books. So read V for Vendetta, just amazing. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that was cool. The Dark Knight Returns, badass. I mean, it's so now I'm starting to become a comic fan. I love it.
There you go, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Jackie Earle Haley. As we reassess the Watchmen movie, again, the comedian. I don't think there was anything wrong with the portrayal of the comedian. His story, Morgan's performance, excellent stuff. Again, leading to probably one of the reasons why he was considered for casting as Negan in Walking Dead. I refuse to believe there isn't a connection to those characters. That said, Jackie Earle Haley, man, what an interesting career. Man, when he first came on the scene as a kid, as Kelly Leak in the Bad News Bears trilogy of movies, and crazy teen sex comedies. I don't remember the name of that one movie he made back in the 80s that now, of course, would be highly inappropriate. But, this was that's the way sex comedies were back in the 80s with teens. Wasn't that big of a deal. And think of where he has gone since then, and I really think he went down some dark corridors around the time of Watchmen. But then to also still be able to perform excellent comedy in things like Semi-Pro, the Will Ferrell movie about the ABA, where he's the whacked-out fan that makes the half-court shot and never gets his money. There's also his turn in The Human Target that came later, where he was kind of a quirky side character, which, by the way, that's a great show that if you didn't watch it when it was originally on, it only made it for a couple seasons, is absolutely worth revisiting. What a terrific... Mark Valley was fantastic as Christopher Chance, and it was a great adaptation of a non-superhero DC comic, but a great action series, both the comic book in its original iteration, in its Vertigo iteration, with the incredible work of Peter Milligan and Cliff Chiang and others, and then finally, too, into the television series. I'm a massive Human Target fan. They got it right. And Jackie Earle was a great part of that as well. Again, interesting to look back and see where these characters and these actors' careers went. But we all loved his letter-perfect interpretation, I think, of Rorschach. Again, one of the shining moments of the Watchmen movie. I think Jackie nailed it. And again, we'll get into it on our one-on-one with Jackie a little bit later here in the broadcast. One more roundtable, Billy Crudup, Malin Akerman, and Patrick Wilson. Obviously, that's Dr. Manhattan, the younger Silk Spectre, and Night Owl, the younger Night Owl, in this roundtable on Word Balloon. The final roundtable of cast members include Malin Akerman, who plays the Silk Spectre, Billy Crudup, who's Dr. Manhattan, and Patrick Wilson, who is the modern-day Night Owl.
Is it kind of amazing to you that this book that has comic book characters that really aren't what you would call like mainstream comic book characters? I mean, they're obviously, alternate universe comic characters has become so amazingly popular, and this movie is now like the talk of the year. Does it kind of surprise you in a way? Like, because I'm sure when you first came on this project, you had never heard of Silk Spectre or Night Owl or Dr. Manhattan.
Nope, never. I mean, I think it's pretty phenomenal. I think when you read, I read the script first. I had no idea that Watchmen existed. I didn't know it was a graphic novel. Got the script, and I thought it was one of the best scripts I had ever read. And went immediately out to buy the novel, because a lot of times when you adapt a novel into a film, you lose so much of it. It just becomes so watered down. And anyway, I read the novel and got extremely excited just because it was so allegiant to the novel. I mean, the script was phenomenal. So I think it's pretty fantastic that it's sort of become its own genre. I mean, this really isn't like any superhero or comic book that I've ever, which is not many that I've read, but I've seen all the superheroes, Superman and Batman.
Come on, tell everybody to read comic books. It'll be so fun.
All right, guys, I really do. No, but I mean, yeah, it's hugely different from anything that I would have expected. A lot of times when you read panels in like a Batman and Robin, you see the pows and the bangs, and it's very sort of juvenile, but this is extreme adult content. It's not for kids.
Billy, what was it like taking on this character? It's so much different than anything you've done before, and acting with the CGI and the effects and all that. What was that like for you?
Well, the visual effects and stuff were much different from anything that I've worked on before. The character was very similar to a lot of the other characters I've played, insofar as they're in the midst of some sort of crisis of self-knowledge. And so to that extent, that was the thing I identified with it, is I couldn't really understand Dr. Manhattan. He was sort of inscrutable, and as far as like the source material goes to describe him and his plight, the screenplay can only go so far. It can only hint at it. So the question is, how do you elaborate on it and give, a real psychological, interesting and like coherent study of this supernatural being. But that ultimately ended up being secondary to figuring out how to hang out in those pajamas and not feel like a douche. So, so one had to take the other.
And it was cool. Other actors, was it hard for you guys to, you're not really seeing Dr. Manhattan, you're seeing...
Oh, no, they were very professional about it. Yep, classy right up to the end.
we might have laughed once or twice in his face when we saw him. I mean, he looked like a human Christmas tree with dots on his face. I mean, and then he's supposed to be playing this almighty superhuman man, and it's just, it's sort of hard to believe in the beginning.
Do tell.
But Billy is
we're
a
used to
phenomenal actor.
Too. That's the other thing, is these characters have known him for a long time.
What was the costume, wearing the costume, and all that like for you?
Well, I mean, that's his whole identity. That's his whole, that's what defines him. I think, it's funny, Jackie and I have had this conversation, actually, about what, he feels strongly that, Walter is no more. And in fact, when he takes off the mask, that's, he is the mask. And I think that's one of the similarities I think that he has with Dan, and that Dan has lost every sense of himself unless he has the suit on. And so, it got some getting used to, but you had to inhabit it as the best version of Dan, the most confident, strongest, most masculine, all those words. And that's, it's such a clear journey. It's one of the biggest arcs that I think I've been able to play in any movie or play. I mean, it's really an unbelievable character. So it was great inhabiting that strength to put the suit on. Because it really was sort of palpable. The first time I remember it was all black and it hadn't even been painted, so I really didn't just look like Batman. It's totally insane. So that was fun.
There's a great opposite attracts with the dynamic between the two of you, because you're someone who grew up kind of as a hero, a wish fulfillment of becoming a hero.
Yeah.
And you're someone that's obviously forced into this role, following your mother's footsteps and stuff. So that's got to be a really human, nice little dynamic to kind of play against.
Yeah, it is actually. And I actually never thought of it that way, but I think that is, a lot of times, I think for Laurie, her costume is her question mark. She doesn't know if that's for her, and I think that both of these characters find strength in each other and they help each other out. And I think there's that moment of realization when we're down in his basement
my lair.
In your lair, and I think ultimately his pain and his want is what makes her decide that this actually is for her and that this is her passion as well. And so it's amazing how they're both catalysts for each other. It is really cool.
This is also probably the first time there's been a comic book movie with superheroes that actually has a pretty intense love scene.
Yeah.
Was that kind of a daunting thing at first, like thinking, wow, we're doing a superhero movie and we've got a big passionate love scene?
I mean, it's never super comfortable. It's, forced intimacy is always bizarre. Luckily for us, it was towards the end of the shoot. We'd gotten to know each other and, new spouses and all that, just on a personal level. You get over that pretty quickly. And the ship was very small, so there's not a lot of room for a lot of people. That's always helpful, too. But to be honest with you, it was one of the most exciting parts, I think, to see on the screen, because you never see it. So with my wife, she was the same way. Like, thank God, I mean, no matter how the characters are in any other comic movie, you can assume they either, you see the hero and you see the girl, and they probably do, but you never see it, or maybe they don't, and I love that you do.
It's humanized.
Yeah,
it's completely, because sex is a really important part of this, sexuality rather, is such an important part of this movie. And every character, there's some, whether it's a lack thereof or wanting to please sexually, or whether it's, Adrian calling Ozzy possibly homosexual, and, every character has where there's my fetish aspect, and every character has, sexuality is so important. And thank God, because I think that's ultimately the most base human element there is.
Billy, would you say that your character is such an actionary, like your actions drive the force of the film, whereas your guys' characters are more reacting? Did it feel like that as you're watching each other do each other's scenes, and that was kind of getting into that action-reaction?
Well, I confess, actually, there is a large part of the Dr. Manhattan narrative where he is only reactive, and he's reactive as a pawn of the government. He's in search of his own motivation his own human motivation, because that's the only reference point, is people keep coming up to him and saying, hey, where are you, where are you, where are you? He is highly motivated, but the things that he's motivated about have nothing to do with the human condition anymore. He's become intrigued by the physical world and by the insight that he has into observing the world on a quantum scale, which is pretty cool. I mean, nobody else on the planet could do it, you know? Nobody else can teleport themselves around. And so he's kind of like testing out his powers for a couple of years, you know? He spends the first part of his journey as a god kind of following the government and losing a bit of himself in it. So that was one of the things that I found very difficult, was on a very simplistic base level. How do I find my motivation from moment to moment? So the end.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Now let's get into my one-on-one conversations with a couple of the cast members. I was bummed that a lot of them, like Billy Crudup and Jeffrey Dean Morgan, were not available on these one-on-ones. I only got to speak directly to the three you're about to hear now. Again, very short amount of time, a lot less than the roundtables. So, I mean, these were really set up for... They're set up to be soundbite interviews, and I get that. I understand the rules, and I certainly will play by them, but that said, there's nothing more annoying than asking your first question and looking over to the person running the press conference and them giving you the wrap-up sign after you've just asked your first question and you're barely 30 seconds into the conversation. But, you know, there's a long line of people waiting, and, you know, you get a couple minutes, you get a couple sound bites. That's what it's built for. It's built for that old traditional media model of 2 minutes on Entertainment Tonight. And that 2 minutes is going to be the setup and the close and maybe one or two quick sound bites. Any sort of entertainment news magazine. And certainly we're seeing examples of that online as well. But, you know, as you know, I like long form. I mean, that's what Word Balloon is all about, is having long form conversation. That's why I have these marathon discussions with the creators and the other writers and pop culture stars when they give me the opportunity to go longer than 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or whatever. So, you know, again, if you get a big name, well, if you're only going to get 20 minutes or 5 minutes or 2 minutes, you'll take it. And case in point, these conversations. Let's start with Malin Akerman. Man, I give her a lot of credit because she has proven, I think that's what comes out of all three of these conversations, and really, again, the entire Watchmen cast, is their versatility. Because I do think that they made very strong statements as these characters did not face typecasting in the ensuing 10 years. And man, Malin Akerman is a classic example of that. But let's talk about the job at hand that she had, becoming Silk Spectre, and dealing with Laurie Jupiter's own psychoses, the way she was raised, the secrets that were kept from her that she discovered throughout the story. Again, I think well represented in the movie itself. Her complicated relationship with her mother, trying to being forced into the role of a legacy hero, something that she never really wanted to do, and discovering that she's a lot more like her father than her mother at the end. And again, you got to hand it to Dave Gibbons. I think art that showed that. I think there were times, once Laurie knew the full story, she had looks on her faces that was very much in concert with the comedian when she found out that the comedian was her daughter. Yeah, I mean it's a really complex character, and Malin Akerman, she rose to the occasion. She really did. Let's get into this conversation with Malin Akerman, the Silk Spectre, on Word Balloon. And now some quick one-on-ones with several of the cast members. I start with the Silk Spectre, Malin Akerman, who I was stunned to realize was also Ben Stiller's wife if you saw the Heartbreak Kid remake. And obviously looks much different as the Silk Spectre than she did as the blonde bombshell in that film.
Tell me, I know that this is kind of atypical for you, being a comedian and a wonderful comedic actor and stuff, but there's really a meatiness to this character, and I know you were talking about as well in the panel as far as the character's arc.
Right.
And that's got to be a really fun challenge for an actress.
Absolutely. I mean, it was the thing I love about it is that it's so, all these characters are based in reality. I mean, they really are, they're human human, they're fallible. And so the reason why I wasn't scared to take on the challenge is because she is so relatable. I mean, I could take a lot from my own life and bring it to the table. You know, she's this woman who's kind of soul searching, figuring out who she is, what she wants to do with her life, finding true love, you know, complicated relationship with one of her parents. I think that's something that, you know, we all go through moments with our parents. And so it was all those aspects of the character that just made her so real and relatable. And so it wasn't as challenging as I thought. I think the learning how to fight was was a big one. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I was wondering too, from the physical standpoint. Were there any female action roles? And I don't want to just leave it at comic books, but really, were there any? You know, even Jennifer Garner, maybe an Alias or anything.
Right.
Anything visually that you watched that kind of made it, maybe informed your physicality of how you did this?
Not so much for research for this character. I got to say that I always loved the James Bond films, and I always loved the femme fatales.
Absolutely.
And that was something that I, you know, longed to do. And so when Silk Spectre came around, not only does she get to kick ass and be a femme fatale, but she also has an amazing story to go along with it. So, you know, you kind of get two birds with one stone. But yeah, I'd have to say that if anything, I just, you know, when I put on that suit, I just felt sort of like a Bond girl. It was
empowered?
Empowered, definitely.
Okay. Very cool. What about the love triangle? I mean, how was it playing with Billy and Patrick and everything, and just kind of the fun of, you know, this choice of hero worship, literally maybe in the case of John, to really finding a soulmate in Dan?
Well, that was interesting too, you know, with Billy, also known as Dr. Manhattan, it was sort of like, again, you know, trying to relate it to real life, which is hard because he's supposed to be this superhuman being. It was more just saying, all right, well, we've all come to the end of a relationship where there's just the spark is gone and you can't relate anyway. I mean, the reasons were different, obviously, with me and Billy as opposed to real relationships. So it was nice to have that sort of, all right, we get to play the end of a relationship, and then we get to go out and feel that sparkle and that the butterflies in the stomach and the reality of finding true love. You know, it was a nice dynamic to get to play both, and they're both such fabulous actors. So we had so much fun doing it. It was incredible.
That's great. You know, you were great in The Heartbreak Kid, and I really think that was an interesting relationship film as well. And I hope this film offers more, you know, things beyond comedy for you, because I think you pulled things off, and it'll be great to see, not just literally, but sexy, but no, honestly, as an actress, and really good luck. I hope that this opens up more doors to you.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Pleasure talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
There you go, Malin Akerman. Man, what a career since Watchmen. I mean, I mentioned her comedy and The Heartbreak Kid. She had that TV show a few years ago called The Comeback on HBO with Lisa Kudrow. An uneven show, but I liked their performances in it. Again, I would put it to the writing in terms of the failures of The Comeback. That said, God, she is great on Billions. Unbelievable on Billions on Showtime. Fantastic performance. And, you know, I mean, and still makes time for big budget movies. I mean, you know, was in Rampage and 27 Dresses and the like. I mean, it's been a great 10 years, I think, since for Malin Akerman. And, again, could have been typecast, but, they obviously had her either wearing a wig or dyeing her hair to be Laurie in Watchmen. And maybe that was a good move because she did look so different than her normal, natural blonde look. But I think she's only proven to be an excellent actor. And again, especially the opportunities given to her by Billions. And like I said, I think playing the Silk Spectre was a tall order and a very complex character. I think she nailed it. I'm kind of shrugging right now. You can't see it. Let's move on to Jackie Earle Haley. I love this guy. I always have. I mean, I'm such a fan of his. And as he became older, I can't say he grew up because, frankly, he is kind of the same size he was back when he was Kelly Leak with Tatum O'Neal in the Bad News Bears first movie when they were both little kids before his voice changed, and he's riding his mini bike. Oh my God, I love that kid. What a great character. That original Bad News Bears movie, completely politically incorrect. But that's one of the things I love about that movie. You couldn't make... they tried to make it again. Tried a couple times. Just it wasn't the same with Billy Bob Thornton, and even a hardball, I think, with Keanu Reeves had a nod to the Bad News Bears. But that guy's a survivor, man. His grandfather was the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, in case you never put two and two together. But he was Jackie Haley, and his grandfather was Jack Haley, of course, a great song and dance man. If I only had a heart. I mean, you know, you gotta love guys like that. But what an interesting career, as I said before. But this was cool because he had just been nominated for an Oscar for Little Children, where he played a child molester, and what a dark role that was. And then he's in the film All the King's Men, the remake of the film with Sean Penn. Again, another flawed movie, but an interesting little character that doesn't have a lot of dialogue and is kind of a backwoods, sort of uneducated character that becomes a hatchet man and political fixer on the dark side for the governor of Louisiana, Willie Stark, Sean Penn's character. And then to go to Rorschach. And again, Rorschach, not an easy role. He nailed it. I'm telling you, I continue to say it, and I mean it. I really think that, those guys in particular were as great as they were. I really didn't talk about Billy Crudup from a post-script Watchmen standpoint, but because of CGI, I think he was able to disappear into the veneer of Dr. Manhattan, and it didn't negatively or positive. I mean, he gave a great performance, I think, as Manhattan as well. But he could walk away and do his other movies as he's done since, and continue to have the quirky career that he's had, even things like Almost Famous, and be his own man. And Jackie, to his credit, again, doing great light comedy and doing great serious roles. He was in the midst of some very dark roles when he took over as a comedian, but since then has had quite the comedic career, and I think gets the right roles and continues to be a very interesting character actor. And I enjoy his work. I look forward to his future work. So let's step back and hear his thoughts on the character of Rorschach and how different this dark character was to his regular demeanor. Jackie Earle Haley on Word Balloon.
Very happy to be talking with Jackie Earle Haley, who plays Rorschach. First of all, I find it really interesting that Rorschach is a continuation of the characters you've been playing lately in Little Children, and also All the King's Men, as well as these dark characters that there's so much subtext there in addition to what we see on the screen and hear from you as well.
I guess I just have that dark character kind of face, and it's funny because I'm the absolute opposite of that. And, all my friends are wondering, dude, what's going on? But, it draws me to this guy. He's such a fascinating character. His past is one that's very troubled and in like a different way than any other character I've ever played. Usually I kind of look into my own soul to try to reconcile with these guys, and I really kind of had to bring Rorschach's soul into mine, and I think at the end of the day he affected me more than I affected him.
And I think you achieved what we were all hoping for too, and it really is a crucial moment for the character when the mask is taken away. There's only Rorschach. Kovacs isn't there, and it really they did a wonderful job, and you did a wonderful job conveying that darkness of Rorschach, despite the fact that his costume was gone, but the essence was still there.
Well, thanks. I mean, to me, it was like they just ripped his face off. The mask is Walter. The face is Rorschach. And people, I've been all over the world over the last week answering these questions, and people kept saying, "So, did you play it differently?" It's like, you know what I mean? When the hood comes up, do you play the redhead different than it's like, not really.
Well, and I think that it's great. I haven't seen the full film yet, but there is that one scene that they showed of you in the prison lunch line, and that really is like the essence of Rorschach, and you nailed the scene. And I know for a lot of readers of the book, that really is the moment, the Watchmen moment and the Rorschach moment, and it was, you nailed it. It was right.
Thanks, bud.
My pleasure, and really, congratulations. It's a great role, and as always, looking forward to your next movie and stuff. It's great stuff as always.
Appreciate it.
Finally, a conversation with the Legacy Night Owl, Patrick Wilson. I kind of think that Patrick Wilson playing Dan was interesting because he certainly had a Clark Kent sort of quality to him. They really dressed him down and made him as frumpy as he possibly could look as Dan, and obviously insignificant, inadequate, having to revert to his civilian role. And I almost think it made him a less, on the surface or in the back of your mind, a likable character than the others. You were supposed to root for him, but again, I think they dressed him down so much that you're like, well, I don't know if I like this guy or not, frankly. And that's interesting because obviously I think Dan in the comics is obviously one of the more sympathetic characters that you do kind of root for. Again, I point to Dave Gibbons' art, and he was able to convey his impotence and his inability to have a meaningful life as Dan Dreiberg as opposed to the fun that he enjoyed as Night Owl. I think once he had the suit on, I think he was excellent. And again, I think the Batman comparisons are easy to see. And, I guess I was on a wrong thinking, especially not seeing the whole movie, and saw both Rorschach and Night Owl as different versions and different shades of Batman, even though they were kind of a Batman and Robin sort of team. Even though that certainly neither would really be I guess really Night Owl would technically be the Robin. But what an interesting career that Pat Wilson has had. I mean, he was in a season of Fargo, and he's made some excellent movies. I didn't realize he played the voice of the President in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Who the hell knew? And he's been having a hell of a career in horror. He was in Girls briefly. He's in one of my favorite Michael Keaton movies, The Founder, all about Ray Kroc and the McDonald's empire. He was King Orrin, of course, just this year in Aquaman. Neat stuff. So, again, and a very... he was a great guy. He was very sympathetic to me because by the time I got to Patrick's, he was the last interview I did, and it was so wham, 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 interview, that I was really getting punchy. And I forget, I literally forgot his name as I was talking to him, and he put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, it's been a long day, dude, just start over, it's all good. So I don't have my screw up, I don't think, on this portion of talking to Patrick, but he was incredibly kind, and I really appreciated that. I mean, the cast could not have been more accommodating and almost sympathized, I think, with us press people with the way they were being hustled from interview to interview. And it was all like, yeah, man, believe me, we're all getting kind of bombarded with this crap, both interviewer and interviewee. So we finish up with a great conversation with Patrick Wilson, Night Owl.
We wrap things up with a one-on-one conversation with the modern-day Night Owl, Patrick Wilson.
Let's talk about Night Owl. And
we can talk about a comedian if you'd like.
No, I'd like to talk about Night Owl because I think it's really interesting. I mean, I hate to say it, but impotence is such an important part of your character, and coming out of that impotence, and and finding your character and then who you truly are is a big part of who you are in the film.
I think it doesn't really get any more basic and primal than that for a guy. That's one of the things that I just loved about the character is it's, there's a fetish aspect of what the suit does to you that is really important because you have to, you finally have a comic that addresses how strange it would be if you wore a suit and what kinds of people would do that. Even though Dan certainly has grown up watching the Minutemen and known how that's a viable option, so it's not something that he just discovered. So there's an acceptance already of the suit, but for him, I mean, the impotence is a huge, huge part of it. And luckily you get to see it conquered.
Yeah, well, and I like that. I mean, you really feel the weight of not being able to be that guy, finding yourself as Night Owl, and then of course having that taken away from you, and having to regain that again. So
no, it's true. I mean, that's Dan, and that's what makes him so complex, but so human. Not that whether people can relate to that or not, or whether it's not about having the same condition or something, certainly, and it's not really, not even to make fun of or anything, but there's just a real primal aspect of this guy that is so clear to play. Being emasculated. I've played characters before that maybe feel sort of lost, I guess, or emasculated, but there's nothing more basic for a man than that. So I'm glad that you finally can address that in a movie, even if it's a big superhero movie.
Well, and it's that humanity that I think makes Watchmen the great book that it was, and now a great movie as well.
I agree.
Tell me about, I was asking Jackie this earlier too, the two aspects of Batman are kind of represented in Night Owl and Rorschach. Sure. I mean, you're the more overt visual kind of realization with the gadgets and stuff, and the humanity of and wanting to save people and everything. Yeah. Whereas Rorschach's really kind of the dark vigilante. Did you and Jackie talk about those similarities, or the opposite sides of this same coin?
I think we didn't really talk about it in terms. I mean, I agree with you, and that's something that I saw. But he and I just really concentrated on their relationship and what they sort of find in each other. Because I don't think Rorschach and Dan are not going to necessarily consciously talk about the different sides of Batman. But I certainly agree with you. And then on the page, I would imagine that's very much what they intended. But certainly, it was great to watch that relationship and how complex that was, and their real understanding for each other. And I'm glad we got to explore that a bit, because that's really Rorschach's most intimate. I mean, if you think about it, is those intimate moments that he has with Dan, and how to convey that. Absolutely. And certainly when you see sort of justice gone completely wrong or black and white, there's something weirdly admirable about that. Not that you agree with that, or not that that's Dan's, and not how Dan would play it, but there is, because Dan, I think there's so much gray, and Dan trying to do the right thing and having the weight of all this. I think there's a real admiration, like, God, you can do that. You can really cut it off. Like, I think there's something admirable.
Well, and I also think when you lose it, it's fun to see Rorschach being the restraining one to say, Daniel, calm down, not in front of the civilians. Yeah. So the dynamic between the two of you is so important to the characters, and you guys did a great job pulling it off. So well done, and congratulations on a great performance.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
So there you go. Those were all my conversations with the Watchmen cast and crew, and Dave Gibbons, of course, as well, the co-creator of Watchmen. And now we've got this HBO show, and we've seen a couple trailers. I know this weekend you can count on the fact, especially either by the time you've heard this or some point over the weekend, HBO is going to likely drop another Watchmen trailer, or perhaps the Hall H audience or whatever room they're in will get a chance to see 10 minutes of the show, 20 minutes of the show, who knows? What do we know about the show? It's obviously after the events of the Watchmen film. It's funny, the comic books were, the prequel comic books were before Watchmen. It seems that Damon Lindelof's TV show is after Watchmen, and we get to explore these characters. I am bummed that Ozymandias from the film, and I got to look up the cast member's name, was not available to us back when we did the press junket. I do know that here, I'm going to look it up right now. Matthew Good, of course, was Ozymandias and Adrian Veidt, and it's very interesting that Jeremy Irons is playing an older Adrian Veidt, and this clearly is years after the consequences of Watchmen. What happens to this world? And I love where the film and the comic book end, with Rorschach's journal about to be discovered by the people at The Guardian, who will, obviously a very right-wing newspaper that is probably going to be very happy to expose the truth. What does that mean for Adrian Veidt? It's obvious from the HBO trailers that we've seen so far that a group of, whether they're organized and are I'm not really sure, but a Rorschach kind of army has grown in the wake of the events of Watchmen. It's a dystopian world, as it should be, but I am intrigued by the ambitions of Damon Lindelof trying to tell a story within this Watchmen universe. Look, at the end of the day, because obviously I'm sure a lot of you listening are like, why are you praising this thing when Alan Moore wanted nothing to do with it? Take my name off, give the money to Dave Gibbons, and leave me alone. His frustration, and I'm sure Dave's frustration too, that this is still a DC property, and unlike a lot of other creator-owned things that may be started at DC or Marvel, would revert back to the creators after a certain amount of time. Watchmen, as I always say, nobody expected Moby Dick. Nobody expected Gone with the Wind or 50 Shades of Grey. Any great novel you can think of that became The Martian, that became such a monster success that whoever owned the film rights and television rights would have such a stranglehold on the property and really be able to exploit it ad infinitum. It'll be very interesting to see in the next 20 years what Warner Brothers does with the Watchmen property in the future, no matter what happens with this HBO show. Like I said, I'm intrigued enough that I'm very much going to go down the road and watch this stuff, because I love this universe that Dave and Alan created, and I think it's a fascinating one. And as much as it's disappointing that they don't have full control over this thing to do with what they want, they are compensated for it. Alan Moore may turn down television and film money, but certainly gets his royalties from the Watchmen book. It's a perennial in comic book stores and bookstores all over the place, and continues to be reordered and maintains a successful afterlife in reprints and new editions. It's very interesting to hear the news that Alan is considering retiring from comics. Wow. I mean, there's a guy that, obviously is still a very powerful voice and strong thinker. It'll be very interesting to see where he goes, if he truly is going to leave comic books, as the word has come out this week. And so I like I said, I wanted to re-examine the Watchmen movie, and I hope you enjoyed this look back at it with me. And I guess we'll see what's to come in the weeks and months ahead with the HBO version, and how well it does, how well it's received. It will likely dictate the future of the Watchmen universe, because we know, regardless, that Alan and probably Dave will not be interested in revisiting. Been there, done that. They've both moved on to many other things in the 30-plus years since the original comic. But I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Word Balloon. Again, brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you, League, for your great support. Comic-Con weekend is here, and I thank you for giving a damn of what I'm doing here at Word Balloon every couple days with a brand new episode. And I appreciate your subscriptions via Patreon. If you want to help out, Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. But if you like what you hear, you want to help out the cause and help me continue to push this thing into a lot of other directions, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon. Is Word Balloon worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth $3 a month to you, the price of a comic book? If you think so, I appreciate the help. Thank you again for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. They're having a great weekend at Comic-Con, and we'll certainly review it with the powers that be from Aftershock in the post-Comic-Con days of next week and beyond. But let's not forget some of their great titles that they've got going. Baby Teeth from Donny Cates, and Garth Ennis's Walk Through Hell, and Jimmy's Bastards, and Cullen Bunn doing great stuff from Dark Arc with Juan Doe to his new book, Night Temporal. Chris Sabella and Trustfall, Matthew Klickstein's You Are Obsolete, Tim Seeley's Dark Red, just a few of the great books that continue to thrill, chill, and challenge imaginations and sensibilities. In the weeks ahead, we'll be having more talks with Aftershock creators about their books, but you don't have to wait. You can find out exactly what's going on at Aftershock, follow the Comic-Con news, but also go to their website where you'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening. More great stuff coming, man. Like I told you, I'm bummed that I'm not at Comic-Con, but that said, I've got some really great content coming in the next few days that will blow your mind. They have nothing to do with Comic-Con, but pretty exciting nerd stuff, and I'm happy to share it with you in the days ahead right here on Word Balloon. So look for some great content coming in the days ahead. Also, this weekend I will be dropping my interview with Mark Russell, who did a great job at DC with all the great Hanna-Barbera adaptations. The Flintstones, Snagglepuss, currently kicking ass on the Wonder Twins, part of Wonder Comics, Brian Bendis' arm of new DC books like Dial H for Hero and Wonder Comics and Naomi and the like, and certainly Young Justice, and Zan and Jaina's adventures continue in the hands of Mark Russell. Really funny guy. And he's got a new book out from Ahoy Comics called Second Coming that proposes the question, what happens when Jesus learns how to be a better human being through the example of a superhero, a Superman kind of example. And it's a very funny parody, and I'm sure it is driving the Westbrook Church people crazy, if they're aware of it. I asked Mark about that. I talked to him before he went off to Comic-Con, and I really look forward to sharing this conversation with you in a couple days as well. So until then, thanks a lot for listening. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.